So when presidential candidates talk about how frequently they go to church, or when they start talking about their faith as a way to define themselves before the voters, you're someone who actually has a long personal history. You know, you attended religious schools, you had a family that was itself comfortable with the idea of faith. You're not, as a liberal, put off by someone like President Obama or candidate Obama during the campaign, talking openly about his faith or talking about how often he attends services?
Nice you to mention my family. I say at the beginning of the book that I got interested in this in part because we were one household where we violated the rule all the time. We talked about religion and politics at the dinner table all the time.
You go back a long way thinking about this stuff, but I wonder, are you put off by candidates like Obama talking about this stuff?
I am put off when it feels like a candidate is using this, and I'm not put off when a candidate seems to be talking authentically, and that's a subjective judgment in part.
Talk about Mike Huckabee during the campaign. Obviously very sincere about his faith, and it was a big part of his character.
Right, and you know, Huckabee is a fascinating case because there were moments when there was extraordinary sincerity, and even his religious faith even made him buck the Republican line on some things. At times when he was talking about immigrants, at times when he was talking about poverty, and he argued that if you are a Christian, you got to care about the poor. But there were other times when you clearly sense that he was using his faith, particularly against Mitt Romney, a Mormon. I think that voters have a fairly good sense of when it's fake and when it's real. And I do get worried that politicians are going out there talking about faith solely for that reason, or feeling that there's a kind of litmus test where if you don't talk about your faith enough, then you can't get votes,
elected.
And that's not a good thing.
I want to move the conversation over a little bit to atheism, which is another thing that you write about with some great passion in the book. And you know, some may believe that a book that is predicated on the idea that the religious right has gone overboard in fusing religion and politics, that might be sympathetic to the argument that we should just have no religion at all, but in fact, as you characterize it, quoting, I guess, a friend
who said this one day.
That the modern movement to promote atheism is itself an overreaction to an overreaction. And you take Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and others to task for being so arrogant in their assumption that there's absolutely no good use for this stuff.
Right. Well, you know, it's funny. I write both respectfully of atheists and critically. Yeah. I'm respectful because I think atheists are actually good for people of faith. If people of faith cannot rationally defend their belief against a smart atheist, then they got to go back to the drawing boards and rethink what they're doing.
Right.
On the other hand, I think that the neo-atheists, as I call them, I think speak with great disrespect to enormously fruitful intellectual traditions that lie behind people's faith, and in the process demean a lot of people who do have faith. I also think that they are so obsessed, somewhat legitimately, with some of the terrible things that have been done in the name of faith. I think that they take that and then say, this is what religion is, when in fact we know empirically, putting aside the arguments about God, that we know how many acts of kindness, generosity, acts of justice have been promoted because people had faith. And I think that but then I also say that the best answer to the neo-atheists is not to condemn them, but to have religious people live according to the creeds that they espouse. Right. Because by our works shall you know us.
Right. Well, I remember during the presidential campaign in 2004, John Kerry quoting James, faith without works is dead, which I thought was actually...
James, actually, one of my favorite books of scripture. Actually, my son is called James, and I went back and reread James after he was born, and I have found, you know, this insistence that if what you do and the way you live doesn't match what you claim to believe, you have a problem.
You're not truly a person of faith.
Yes.
Well, this brings me back to your family, because in fact in the book you write, I think quite movingly, about the experience growing up in your household as someone who witnessed people who were people of faith but who also believed in the social justice aspects of their faith and lived what they preached.
Right. You know, in some ways, my dad may have been the original compassionate conservative. He was somebody who was conservative, who also he was a dentist who started a free dental clinic for kids in the 30s that kept going all his life. And he said to me once, I'm against socialized medicine, but we're going to get it because our professions are too stingy. And my mom, who was a teacher, and her passion in life was to get kids to read. And I argue in the book that if we're honest, whether we're people of faith or people doubters or non-believers, a lot of our attitude toward religion is shaped not by the rational arguments, but by experiences with faith. And what I say in the book is that I've always found myself attracted to faith because when I looked at my parents and a lot of other people around me growing up, they actually lived the talk. And they were not narrow-minded. They engaged. We had an Orthodox Jewish next-door neighbor, and she and my mom loved to engage in dialogues about God and the meaning of God and how they made sense of God. This was an open-minded, intellectually serious view of the world that was also led to good actions.
Right. And you had a similar experience in school, did you not, being taught?
Right. I was taught by Benedictines who, it was actually a very interesting school where a lot of the monks had actually done something else in life. So one of my Christian doctrine teachers had been an actor in New York. The head of the monastery had been involved, he was a physicist involved in the atomic bomb project. These were very intellectually serious people. And what I write in the book is I've never been able to accept the idea that religious people are not intellectually serious, because here were some of the most intellectually serious people I've ever met.
In your experience,
who were people of faith. The other person I want to mention is a sixth grade nun, Sister Genevieve. She was teaching us up in New England, my hometown of Fall River, Massachusetts, with deep Southern accent. And I wondered, where does this come from? Turned out that in the 50s, she had organized a biracial, integrated First Communion service and got kicked out of the parish she was in Louisiana. And as I say in the book, she wasn't some radical nun. She was a Christian who thought segregation was wrong. And so she ended up teaching us. And that was probably as good a lesson on civil rights as I ever got from anybody.
Remarkable. Well, this is a wonderful topic, and I encourage people to buy the book in paperback. It's a great thing to continue in the privacy of your own reading time.
Thank you.
Let's move the conversation out and broaden it to talk about what's going on in Washington now. You're a wonderful observer of what's happening in the White House and what's happening in the political world. This has been quite a summer, hasn't it? We're still reeling from the month of August, in which everybody just went crazy over health care reform, and the president's numbers fell. And what do you make of it, and what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of months?
I'm expecting at any moment that the audience we have here today is going to rise up and start
pitchforks and torches, and
we're having signs.
Not for the first time.
Right.
What do you think?
August was not a good month for the president or healthcare reform, and July wasn't very good either. I think there were two things that went haywire. I think in July, the congressional process is never pretty. They don't call it sausage making for nothing. And I think people were wondering, what is this about? They couldn't reach conclusion on a bill. The Senate Finance Committee looked like it wanted to keep meeting until the second coming before they come out with a bill. And then you had August with this organized opposition, which got a lot of airtime. I interviewed a bunch of members of Congress who made the point that not all the town meetings were like the ones we saw the most of. There were a lot of good town meetings where people were for or against this or had doubts about it.
But they were calm, though.
But they were reasonably calm.
Yeah.
The ones, David Price, a very smart congressman from North Carolina, said a TV producer came up to him and said, look, I just want you to know, if your meeting doesn't blow up, it's not going to get on television. The impression created by that was that there was more opposition to this bill than there was support. Secondly, you had all these wacky things that got out there of death panels and the notion that there were death panels in this bill and other forms of misinformation. I think the administration was very slow, almost listless in the summer to combat that.
Right.
I think that
why didn't the press jump on that? The reality is, whether you're a liberal or a conservative, there are no death panels in the bill. There is something called objective truth, and the reality is the media didn't seem to sufficiently rebut those charges by way of fact-checking the claims about the bill. Do you think that did our profession fail the country in not being sufficiently aggressive on that?
Yeah, I think the biggest danger in our profession on this kind of subject is that there may be two sides to an argument, but there aren't two sides to the facts. Right. And that if you reduce everything to he said, she said, journalism, X said the death penalty, that's flatly untrue, but Y said that, actually they may be in there. And I think there's a fear of looking partisan if you just say, this is a lie. And over time, I think the story got out that no, there are no death penalties.
But it took a while.
But it took a while, and
right.
I think it's a dangerous thing, because I think if we have no other purpose, it's at least to let people sort out, give people a sense of what's true, and they can sort out what they make of it after that.
Right.